I stared at my parents across the kitchen table, their faces stone cold with disappointment. Mom's arms were crossed, Dad's jaw clenched tight. Behind them, my younger brother Jake sat with that smug little smile that made my blood boil. "You will not return to school until you apologize to your brother," Dad declared. "Jake worked hard on that science project, and your accusations are completely out of line." I felt the walls closing in. 24 hours to choose between my pride and my future. The fluorescent light above our kitchen table buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across my father's weathered face. 3 weeks had passed since the incident that shattered what remained of my faith in this family. 3 weeks since my younger brother Jake had stolen my life's work and claimed it as his own masterpiece. It started 6 months ago in our garage. While Jake spent his evenings playing video games and scrolling through social media, I had been hunched over a makeshift workbench, soldering circuits and writing code late into the night. My project wasn't some typical high school science fair display. I was building an artificial intelligence system that could learn and adapt to solve complex mathematical problems. The hardware alone represented months of saving every dollar from my part-time job at Miller's hardware store. The robot's neural network could process data streams and make predictive calculations that impressed even Merchen, my computer science teacher. I had documented every breakthrough, every failed attempt, every small victory in a detailed journal. My phone contained time-stamped photos of the construction process, and my laptop held gigabytes of original programming code that I had written line by painstaking line. Jake knew about my project because he often wandered into the garage supposedly looking for sports equipment, but actually watching me work. He asked questions that seemed innocent at the time. How did the sensors communicate with the main processor? What algorithms controlled the learning functions? Why did I choose those specific materials for the housing? I answered because I was proud of what I had accomplished and foolish enough to trust my own brother. The betrayal came 3 weeks ago when Jake announced at dinner that he had won first place at the regional science fair. My parents erupted in celebration, praising their youngest son for his incredible intelligence and dedication. Dad called his business partners to brag about Jake's achievement. Mom posted photos on social media with captions about her brilliant boy. Jake basked in the attention, describing technical details with the confidence of someone who had actually understood the work. When I saw the local newspaper's coverage the next morning, my stomach dropped. There was Jake, standing proudly beside my robot, my artificial intelligence system, my months of exhausting labor. The caption read, "Local student Jake Thompson creates groundbreaking AI technology." The article quoted Jake explaining concepts that I had taught him during those garage conversations. I confronted him immediately, dragging him into the garage where my original sketches and components remained scattered across the workbench. Jake's reaction was not denial or shame, but rather irritation that I had discovered his theft. He claimed that since we were brothers, my ideas belonged to the family. Besides, he argued I was a senior and would be graduating soon while he needed impressive achievements for his college applications. When I brought the evidence to our parents, everything fell apart. Dad examined my documentation with the skeptical eye of a man who had already decided the verdict. Mom dismissed my timestamps as easily manipulated digital files. Jake stood behind them wearing that same smug expression that now haunted my dreams. They accused me of jealousy, of trying to sabotage my brother's success out of spite and resentment. The worst part was watching Jake receive scholarship offers and university recruitment letters based on my stolen work. Massachusetts Institute of Technology sent a formal invitation for Jake to participate in their early admission program. Stanford University requested additional information about his research methodology. 3 prestigious engineering schools offered full academic scholarships complete with research opportunities and mentorship programs. Meanwhile, my own college application suffered because I could not submit the project that represented my best work. Admissions counselors suggested that my academic portfolio lacked the innovation and creativity that would distinguish me from thousands of other applicants. Without my robotics achievement, I appeared to be just another average student with decent grades and no remarkable accomplishments. The pattern of favoritism wasn't new, but the science fair incident exposed how deeply rooted the problem had become. Jake received a brand new Toyota Camry for his 16th birthday, while I had saved for 2 years to buy my used Honda Civic. His college fund contained $30,000, while mine held barely $8,000. When Jake struggled with mathematics, our parents hired expensive tutors, but when I needed help with advanced chemistry, they suggested I ask my teacher for extra credit assignments. Jake's bedroom occupied the larger space on the second floor, complete with a private bathroom and walk-in closet. My room was cramped and shared a bathroom with the guest area that doubled as Dad's home office. During family gatherings, relatives always asked Jake about his plans and achievements while treating me like background decoration. The message was crystal clear. Jake was the golden child destined for greatness, and I was the supporting character in his success story. But something had changed inside me during those 3 weeks of watching my brother receive praise for my stolen work. The anger was still there, burning hot and steady, but it was now accompanied by cold calculation. I realized that fighting this battle on their chosen battlefield would never work. My parents would always believe Jake over me, always find ways to justify his actions while questioning my motives. The system was rigged, and I was tired of playing by their unfair rules. That night, after Dad delivered his ultimatum about the apology, I sat in my room staring at my computer screen. An email notification blinked in the corner, a reminder about college application deadlines approaching. Most students my age were panicking about admission essays and recommendation letters, but I faced a different kind of deadline. 24 hours to choose between my self-respect and my family's conditional acceptance. Westfield Academy had been sending me recruitment materials for months. The elite private school offered accelerated programs for gifted students, state-of-the-art laboratories, and direct partnerships with major universities. Their application required demonstrated excellence in science and technology, exactly the kind of achievement that my stolen robotics project represented. The deadline for transfer applications was tomorrow at midnight. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not an apology letter to Jake, but something far more powerful. An application essay that told the true story of my artificial intelligence project, complete with technical specifications, original code samples, and detailed photographic documentation. If my own family refused to recognize my capabilities, perhaps strangers would prove more perceptive. The irony was perfect. Jake had stolen my work to advance his future, but his theft had also created the very evidence I needed to escape this toxic environment. Every photo he took of my robot, every question he asked about my programming methods, every detail he memorized for his fraudulent presentation, had been carefully documented in my journals and digital files. As I uploaded the final attachment to my Westfield Academy application, Jake's voice echoed from the hallway, bragging to some friend on the phone about his upcoming MIT interview. He had no idea that his house of lies was about to collapse, and I was no longer interested in being the one to warn him. Morning light filtered through my bedroom window, illuminating stacks of notebooks and printed documents that I had arranged across my desk like a chess master studying the board. Sleep had been impossible, but the sleepless hours had been productive. What started as a simple college transfer application had evolved into something much more comprehensive, a complete documentation of Jake's academic fraud spanning the past 3 years. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic dishonesty that went far beyond stealing my robotics project. Screenshots from Jake's phone, which I had obtained months earlier when he asked me to fix a software problem, revealed a network of purchased homework assignments, bought test answers, and plagiarized essays. The popular kid with the charming smile had built his entire academic reputation on deception. Text message chains showed Jake paying senior students $20 for completed calculus homework. Email exchanges revealed his purchase of advanced copies of standardized tests from a corrupt administrator at a neighboring school district. Bank records from his checking account, which I could access through our family's shared financial management app, documented regular payments to academic cheating services and essay writing companies. I had originally gathered this information as insurance, a way to protect myself if Jake ever tried to sabotage my own academic efforts. The irony was that I had never intended to use it as a weapon. Unlike my brother, I preferred to win through merit rather than manipulation. But circumstances had changed, and sometimes survival required adopting new strategies. The most damaging evidence involved Jake's scholastic aptitude test scores. Hidden camera footage from my phone positioned strategically during his at-home practice sessions showed him receiving answers via text message during timed practice exams. The same method had undoubtedly been used during his actual test, despite explaining his impossibly high scores that had impressed college admissions counselors across the country. At 7 o'clock sharp, our family gathered for breakfast in the kitchen. Dad sat behind his tablet reading news headlines between sips of black coffee. Mom bustled around the stove, preparing Jake's favorite blueberry pancakes while heating up a frozen waffle for me. Jake scrolled through his phone, probably admiring social media posts celebrating his science fair victory. Well, Dad's voice cut through the morning routine like a blade. Have you come to your senses about apologizing to your brother? I looked up from my cereal bowl, meeting his expectant gaze with calm composure. All right. The single word hung in the air, carrying none of the resistance or argument that my parents had anticipated. Mom paused mid-flip with her spatula. Jake glanced up from his phone with surprise. Dad leaned forward, clearly expecting more explanation. All right, Mom repeated as if she hadn't heard correctly. I said, all right. I confirmed, returning my attention to my breakfast. You want me to apologize to Jake, so I will. Jake's expression shifted from surprise to satisfaction. He had expected a prolonged battle, dramatic arguments, and eventually my humiliating surrender. Instead, he was witnessing what appeared to be immediate capitulation. His smug smile returned wider than ever. Good, Dad declared, his stern demeanor softening slightly. I'm glad you finally recognized that your accusations were unfounded. Jake worked very hard on that project, and your jealousy was completely inappropriate. Sometimes the mature thing is admitting when you're wrong, Mom added, sliding Jake's pancakes onto his plate. This family works best when we support each other instead of tearing each other down. I nodded agreeably, finishing my cereal in silence while my parents exchanged satisfied glances. They interpreted my calm acceptance as proof that their tough love approach had succeeded. Jake basked in their approval, already planning how he would graciously accept my apology and perhaps offer some condescending forgiveness in return. What they couldn't see was the transfer application confirmation email that had arrived in my inbox at 3 a.m, or the acceptance letter that followed 2 hours later. Westfield Academy's admissions committee had been so impressed with my genuine achievements and technical documentation that they had expedited my application for immediate enrollment. Classes would begin the following Monday. After breakfast, I drove to Lincoln High School for what would be my final day as a student there. The building felt different somehow, as if I was already viewing it through the lens of memory rather than daily routine. Hallways that had once seemed narrow and confining now appeared merely temporary, a stage that I would soon exit. My first stop was the guidance office, where Mrs. Rodriguez greeted me with her usual warmth. She had always been one of the few adults who recognized my potential, even when my grades suffered due to the stress of dealing with Jake's constant sabotage of my academic efforts. Isiah, she said, looking up from a stack of college recommendation letters. I was hoping to see you today. I have some exciting news about scholarship opportunities that might interest you. Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez, I have some news of my own. I placed the Westfield Academy acceptance letter on her desk, watching her expression transform from confusion to amazement as she read the details. This is incredible, she whispered, examining the full scholarship offer and advanced placement opportunities. When did you apply? I thought the deadline had passed months ago. Transfer applications have different deadlines, I explained. I submitted everything last night and received acceptance this morning. I'll be starting classes on Monday." Mrs. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, studying my face with the perceptive eyes of someone who had guided hundreds of students through academic crises. "This is about the science fair situation, isn't it? The project that you claimed your brother stole?" I nodded, appreciating her direct approach. Unlike my parents, Mrs. Rodriguez had actually examined my evidence with an open mind. She had seen my original sketches, reviewed my programming code, and witnessed my genuine understanding of the technical concepts that Jake could only parrot superficially. "I'm proud of you for finding a solution instead of just complaining about the problem," she said, signing the transfer authorization forms with evident satisfaction. "Westfield Academy is gaining an exceptional student, and honestly, this school is losing one of its brightest minds." My locker clean-out process attracted curious stares from classmates who couldn't understand why someone would voluntarily leave during senior year. I removed textbooks, personal items, and the few mementos that had accumulated during my 4 years at Lincoln High. The space that had once felt cramped now seemed cavernous, a hollow shell waiting for its next occupant. Jake's locker was located 3 rows away, decorated with congratulatory notes from friends and teachers praising his science fair achievement. College recruitment stickers covered the metal surface like badges of honor, each one representing opportunities that rightfully belonged to me. The irony was that Jake had no idea how precarious his position had become. During lunch period, I submitted my final transfer paperwork to the main office and turned in my student identification card. The administrative staff wished me well, expressing surprise at my sudden departure, but respecting my decision to pursue advanced educational opportunities. Several teachers stopped by to offer encouragement and request that I stay in touch about my future achievements. The afternoon passed quietly, with no dramatic confrontations or emotional goodbyes. Most of my classmates were too focused on their own senior year activities to pay much attention to one student's unexpected transfer. Jake spent the day accepting congratulations and discussing his upcoming college interviews, completely oblivious to the storm that was gathering around him. After school, I stopped by Merchen's computer science classroom to thank him for his mentorship and returned some advanced programming textbooks that I had borrowed. He expressed disappointment about my transfer, but acknowledged that Westfield Academy's technology program would provide opportunities that Lincoln High simply couldn't match. "Your artificial intelligence project was genuinely impressive," he said, shaking my hand with sincere respect. "I hope you'll continue developing those ideas at your new school. The world needs more innovative thinkers like you." I thanked him, but didn't mention that the project he was praising had been attributed to my brother at the regional science fair. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when victory was already assured through other means. That evening, I packed my belongings methodically, separating items that would accompany me to Westfield Academy from those that would remain behind. My room felt like a time capsule filled with remnants of a childhood that had been overshadowed by Jake's constant need for attention and praise. As I folded clothes and sorted through books, I could hear my parents in the living room, discussing Jake's upcoming MIT interview and celebrating what they believed was their successful handling of our recent conflict. They had no idea that their golden boy's house of cards was about to collapse, or that their older son had just secured a future that would eclipse anything Jake could achieve through fraud and deception. The last item I packed was my journal, the leather-bound notebook that contained every detail of my robotics project, along with documentation of Jake's various academic crimes. Tomorrow, when my parents discovered my empty locker and transfer paperwork, they would finally understand that I had chosen a different battlefield entirely. Sometimes the most powerful move in chess is the one your opponent never sees coming. While Jake celebrated his stolen victory, and my parents congratulated themselves on their parenting skills, I had quietly repositioned myself for checkmate. The game wasn't over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often follows life-changing decisions. I woke before my alarm feeling refreshed despite having slept only 4 hours. Today was my first day at Westfield Academy, but it was also the day that Jake would discover the true consequences of his academic fraud. My parents had already left for work when I descended to the kitchen, avoiding the awkward breakfast conversation that might have revealed my transfer before Jake made his discovery at school. I ate quickly, gathered my new school materials, and drove toward Westfield Academy's impressive campus, leaving behind the suburban neighborhood that had never quite felt like home. Westfield Academy occupied a sprawling 200-acre campus on the outskirts of town, featuring state-of-the-art laboratories, advanced technology centers, and classroom buildings that resembled a prestigious university more than a typical high school. Students walked between classes with the confident posture of young people who understood their exceptional educational opportunities. These were my new peers, intellectually curious, academically driven, and refreshingly honest about their achievements. My first period advanced robotics class took place in a laboratory that contained equipment worth more than most schools' entire science budgets. Professor Williams, a former aerospace engineer who had worked on NASA projects, welcomed me personally and introduced me to classmates who were already deep into sophisticated projects involving machine learning and autonomous systems. "I reviewed your transfer application," Professor Williams said quietly, pulling me aside after class introductions. "Your artificial intelligence work is remarkable for someone your age. I'd like to discuss ways we can expand those concepts into something even more advanced." The contrast with my experience at Lincoln High was immediately apparent. Here, academic excellence was expected rather than exceptional. Students collaborated on projects that would have been impossible at my previous school, supported by faculty who possessed real-world expertise and genuine enthusiasm for their subjects. I felt like a musician who had finally found an orchestra capable of performing the symphonies in his head. Meanwhile, 15 miles away at Lincoln High School, Jake was about to discover that his carefully constructed academic facade was crumbling. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the morning, each one revealing another piece of his growing panic. The first message arrived at 9:30, "Where are you? Your locker is empty." 10 minutes later, "Did you really transfer schools? This is insane. By 10:15, Mom and Dad are going to kill you when they find out." I ignored the messages, focusing instead on my new coursework and the exciting conversations with classmates who shared my passion for technology and innovation. During lunch period, I toured the Advanced Engineering Workshop, where students designed and built prototypes for national competitions. The resources available here would allow me to pursue projects that had been impossible at Lincoln High. Jake's messages became increasingly frantic as the day progressed. "The guidance counselor confirmed your transfer. How could you do this to the family? Mom is crying in the parking lot. She drove here when I called her. Dad left work early. He's furious about this whole situation. You need to come home right now and explain yourself." But the message that made my blood run cold arrived just before my last class of the day. "I found your hidden camera in the garage. I know what you recorded." Jake had finally discovered the surveillance equipment that I had installed months earlier to document my robotics project. What he didn't realize was that the cameras had also captured much more than my construction process. Hours of footage showed Jake searching through my work, photographing my designs, and even practicing his science fair presentation using my technical specifications. More importantly, the cameras had recorded Jake's confession to his friend Marcus about stealing the project. The conversation had taken place 3 weeks ago when Jake thought he was alone in the garage. He had bragged about his clever deception, laughed about my naivety in trusting him, and expressed satisfaction at finally receiving more attention than his older brother. My phone remained silent for the rest of the afternoon, but I knew Jake was frantically searching for any other evidence that might implicate him. He had no idea about the extent of documentation I had gathered over the years, or the backup systems I had installed to protect the most damaging material. At 4 o'clock, I received a call from Mrs. Rodriguez at Lincoln High. Her voice carried a mixture of concern and barely suppressed excitement. "Isiah, I think you should know that Jake came to see me during lunch period. He was asking strange questions about college application fraud and whether students could be prosecuted for submitting false information to universities. That's interesting, I replied, though I wasn't particularly surprised by Jake's panic. There's something else, she continued. I received a phone call this afternoon from an admissions counselor at MIT. Apparently, someone submitted an anonymous tip about potential academic misconduct related to your brother's application. They're requesting additional documentation about his science fair project. My heart rate increased slightly, though I kept my voice steady. I don't know anything about that. I'm sure you don't, Mrs. Rodriguez said, though her tone suggested she suspected otherwise. But Isiah, if you do know anything about irregularities in your brother's academic record, now might be the time to speak up. Academic fraud is a serious matter that can have consequences far beyond high school. After ending the call, I sat in my car in Westfield Academy's parking lot, watching my new classmates head toward their after-school activities and part-time jobs. These students earned their achievements through effort and ability, rather than deception and theft. They represented the kind of academic community where I could finally thrive without constantly watching my back or protecting my work from sabotage. My phone buzzed with a new message from Jake. Please tell me you haven't posted it. The desperation in those 8 words revealed everything. Jake had discovered enough evidence to understand that his future hung in the balance, but he still didn't know the full extent of what I had documented. He was probably imagining worst-case scenarios, social media posts, exposing his fraud emails sent to college admissions offices, anonymous tips to school administrators. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Jake's number appeared on the screen, but when I answered, Dad's voice erupted through the speaker. Mati, posted what? The question carried the weight of a man whose world was suddenly shifting beneath his feet. In the background, I could hear Mom crying and Jake's panicked voice, trying to explain something incomprehensible. The Golden Boy's perfect image was finally cracking, and my parents were witnessing the collapse in real time. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, though we both knew I was lying. Don't play games with me, Isiah. Your brother is having some kind of breakdown claiming you have videos and documents that could destroy his college prospects. What kind of evidence are you supposedly holding over his head? I let the silence stretch for several seconds, allowing Dad to contemplate the implications of his question. If Jake was panicking about evidence of wrongdoing, then perhaps the wrongdoing actually existed. Maybe his older son's accusations hadn't been motivated by jealousy after all. Why don't you ask Jake what he's done, that he's so worried about people discovering? I suggested calmly. The line went quiet, except for muffled conversation in the background. I could picture the scene, Jake sweating and stammering while trying to explain his way out of an increasingly impossible situation. Mom demanding answers that made sense, Dad realizing that his perfect son might not be quite so perfect after all. When Dad spoke again, his voice had lost some of its authoritative edge. Come home immediately. We need to discuss this as a family. I'm afraid that's not possible, I replied. I have orientation activities at my new school this evening. Perhaps we can talk tomorrow. Your new school? The confusion in Dad's voice was almost comical. What are you talking about? I transferred to Westfield Academy this morning, full academic scholarship advanced placement in their engineering program. I thought Jake might have mentioned it during his panic attack. The phone went silent for nearly 30 seconds. When Dad finally spoke, his words came out slowly and carefully. You transferred schools without discussing it with your parents. Is my son? You suspended my education until I apologized to Jake, I reminded him. I found an alternative solution that didn't require me to grovel for forgiveness after being falsely accused. Falsely accused of what exactly? The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire. Dad was finally asking the right questions, finally considering the possibility that his golden boy might have feet of clay. Jake's panic had accomplished what months of evidence and explanation had failed to achieve, planting doubt in our father's mind about which son was telling the truth. Why don't you ask Jake about his science fair project? I suggested. Ask him to explain the technical details without referring to notes. Ask him where he learned advanced programming concepts that aren't taught in any of his classes. Ask him to demonstrate his understanding of the artificial intelligence algorithms that impressed the judges. Dad's breathing was audible through the phone, heavy and troubled. In the background, Jake's voice had become high-pitched and desperate, no longer the confident tone of a celebrated achiever, but the panicked pleading of someone whose lies were finally catching up with him. "We'll discuss this tomorrow," Dad said finally, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Of course," I agreed. "I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. I suggest you compile a list." After hanging up, I sat in my car for several more minutes watching the sun set behind Westfield Academy's impressive buildings. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would be academic challenges rather than family drama. I would compete with students who earned their achievements honestly, study under teachers who valued genuine understanding, and build projects that no one could steal or claim as their own. My phone buzzed with one final message from Jake. "I'm sorry, please don't destroy me." But some apologies come too late, and some betrayals create consequences that no amount of regret can undo. Jake had chosen his path when he decided that stealing was easier than earning. Now he would discover that every shortcut eventually leads to a dead end, and some bridges burn completely when you try to cross them carrying someone else's stolen fire. Wednesday morning brought news that transformed family breakfast conversations across our suburban neighborhood. The local newspaper's education section featured a prominent article titled "Academic Fraud Investigation, Rocks Regional Science Fair," complete with photographs and details that made my parents' coffee grow cold while they read in stunned silence. I learned about the article from Professor Williams, who mentioned it during my second day at Westfield Academy. Apparently, several universities had begun questioning the authenticity of projects submitted by students from our region, and MIT had formally requested additional documentation from multiple applicants to verify their claimed achievements. My new classmates discussed the scandal with the detached interest of observers rather than participants. Academic integrity was simply assumed at Westfield Academy, where students competed based on genuine ability rather than fabricated accomplishments. The contrast with Lincoln High's toxic environment couldn't have been more stark. "It's unfortunate when a few dishonest students cast doubt on everyone's legitimate work," commented Sarah, my lab partner in advanced robotics. "But eventually, the truth always comes out, doesn't it?" Her innocent observation carried more weight than she realized. Truth had a way of surfacing, especially when someone had spent months documenting lies and preparing for exactly this moment. Jake's house of cards was finally collapsing, and the falling pieces were creating damage far beyond what he had anticipated. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the morning with updates from the home front. Jake had apparently spent the previous evening in his room door locked, refusing to come downstairs for dinner or family discussion. Mom had tried coaxing him out with promises of his favorite foods and reassurances that everything would be fine. Dad had taken a different approach, demanding explanations and threatening consequences, until Jake's muffled sobs could be heard through his bedroom door. Mrs. Rodriguez called during my lunch period with news that MIT's admissions office had officially withdrawn Jake's early acceptance offer, pending the results of their academic misconduct investigation. 2 other universities had followed suit, and a third was requesting face-to-face interviews to verify Jake's technical knowledge. "The investigation is expanding," she explained, her voice carrying professional concern mixed with personal sadness. "They're looking into other students from our school who submitted projects in the same competition. Apparently, someone provided very detailed evidence about systematic cheating." I expressed appropriate surprise while silently acknowledging my role in exposing the fraud. The anonymous tip I had submitted to MIT included not only documentation of Jake's theft, but also evidence of the broader cheating network that operated within Lincoln High's advanced programs. Jake wasn't the only student who had been buying test answers and submitting purchased assignments, but he was certainly the most visible target due to his recent publicity. The afternoon brought even more dramatic developments. Jake's friend Marcus, apparently panicking about his own potential exposure, had confessed to school administrators about the organized cheating ring that had been operating for over 2 years. His confession implicated dozens of students and revealed corruption that extended beyond simple test cheating into grade manipulation and transcript falsification. Principal Henderson called an emergency faculty meeting to discuss the crisis, and several teachers who had previously dismissed concerns about academic irregularities suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. Mrs. Patterson, who taught advanced placement chemistry, admitted that she had suspected some students were submitting purchased lab reports, but had ignored her suspicions to avoid controversial investigations. Mir Foster, the physics teacher who had served as Jake's science fair mentor, revealed that he had questioned Jake's sudden mastery of advanced concepts, but had accepted the boy's explanations about independent study and online tutorials. The teacher's guilt was obvious, as he described recommending Jake for prestigious summer research programs based on abilities that were apparently fraudulent. But the most devastating revelation came when school security reviewed surveillance footage from the technology laboratory. The videos showed Jake and several accomplices removing equipment after hours, apparently for an unauthorized project that involved selling stolen electronics to students at neighboring schools. What had started as an academic fraud investigation had uncovered actual criminal activity. My parents finally reached me by phone that evening, after I had returned to the small apartment near Westfield Academy that would serve as my temporary residence while completing the school year. Mom's voice was barely recognizable through her tears, while Dad sounded like a man who had aged 10 years in 48 hours. "The police were here," Mom whispered. "They asked Jake questions about stolen school property. He admitted to taking things but claimed it was just borrowing equipment for his projects." "Borrowing," I repeated, though I knew the surveillance footage told a different story. "They have videos," Dad said heavily. "Jake removing computers and laboratory equipment on multiple occasions. Apparently he's been running some kind of resale operation through social media." The irony was almost too perfect. Jake had stolen my robotics project to impress college admissions committees, but his theft of school property was what would ultimately destroy his future. The boy who had always taken shortcuts was finally discovering that every shortcut led to the same destination consequences. "There's going to be a hearing," Mom continued, her voice breaking. "Criminal charges are possible. Restitution will definitely be required. Jake's college prospects are completely ruined." I listened to their pain with mixed emotions. Part of me felt satisfaction at seeing justice finally served, but another part grieved for the family that might have been if Jake had chosen honesty over deception. My parents were good people who had made the mistake of enabling their younger son's worst impulses while dismissing their older son's genuine achievements. "What about your transfer?" Dad asked, his question carrying an undertone of desperate hope. "Could you consider coming back to Lincoln High for your final semester? The family needs to stay together during this crisis." "I'm afraid that's not possible," I replied gently. "I've already started advanced coursework at Westfield Academy that isn't available anywhere else. Besides, I think Jake needs to face the consequences of his actions without anyone rushing to rescue him." The silence that followed my refusal spoke volumes about my parents' growing understanding of the situation they had created. For years, they had prioritized Jake's immediate happiness over long-term character development, while dismissing my attempts to warn them about his dishonesty. Now they were reaping the harvest of their permissive parenting and willful blindness. "The newspaper wants to interview our family," Mom said eventually. "They're writing a follow-up story about the academic fraud investigation. What should we tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I suggested. "Explain that some students chose shortcuts instead of hard work and that those choices have consequences. Maybe other families can learn from your experience." After ending the call, I sat in my small but comfortable living space surrounded by textbooks and projects that represented my genuine academic achievements. Through my window, I could see Westfield Academy's campus, where students were working late in laboratories and study groups pursuing knowledge for its own sake, rather than for false recognition. My phone buzzed with a final text message from Jake. "I know you hate me, but I'm scared. Everything is falling apart." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt genuine sympathy for my brother. He was 18 years old, facing criminal charges and social humiliation, watching his carefully constructed future crumble around him. The consequences were severe, perhaps more severe than his crimes deserved, but they were also the inevitable result of years of dishonest choices. I typed a brief response. "I don't hate you, but actions have consequences and yours are just catching up with you. Maybe this is your chance to finally learn how to earn things honestly." The next morning brought news that 3 more students from Lincoln High had been arrested on charges related to the stolen electronics operation. Jake's name appeared prominently in the newspaper coverage described as the alleged ringleader of the criminal enterprise. His photograph, the same image that had celebrated his science fair victory just weeks earlier, now illustrated a cautionary tale about academic fraud and teenage crime. My parents' social standing in the community evaporated overnight. Dad's business clients began questioning his judgment and character, wondering how a man who couldn't recognize his own son's criminal behavior could be trusted with their financial investments. Mom resigned from her volunteer positions, rather than face the whispered conversations and pitying glances that followed her everywhere. The family that had once celebrated their golden boy's achievements now found themselves isolated and ashamed, learning too late that reputation built on lies inevitably crumbles into dust. Meanwhile, 15 miles away, their older son was quietly building a future based on genuine ability, honest effort, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from choosing integrity over convenience. Sometimes the most profound lessons are learned not through success but through watching others pay the price for choosing deception over truth. Jake's downfall was teaching our entire community about the importance of authenticity, while his older brother's success demonstrated that genuine achievement, though more difficult to attain, creates foundations that can never be shaken by scandal or exposed as fraud. The 3rd week of March brought unseasonably warm weather to our region, but the temperature inside my family's house remained frigid with unspoken recriminations and mounting legal troubles. Jake's criminal defense attorney had painted a grim picture during their initial consultation: felony theft charges, potential juvenile detention, and a permanent record that would follow him into adulthood. I learned these details not from family conversations, which had ceased entirely, but from Mrs. Rodriguez, who remained in contact with both my parents and Jake's legal team in her capacity as Lincoln High's guidance counselor. The scope of the theft operation had shocked even experienced investigators. Over 18 months, Jake and his accomplices had stolen nearly $50,000 worth of electronics laboratory equipment and computer hardware from 3 different schools. The district attorney is treating this as organized crime rather than teenage mischief, Mrs. Rodriguez explained during one of our weekly check-in calls. Apparently, Jake had sophisticated systems for cataloging stolen items, finding buyers, and laundering the money through multiple bank accounts. The boy who had always claimed that his academic shortcuts were harmless pranks had actually been running a criminal enterprise with the efficiency of a seasoned professional. His stolen robotics project was merely the tip of an iceberg that extended far below the surface of polite suburban respectability. Meanwhile, my life at Westfield Academy was flourishing beyond my most optimistic expectations. Professor Williams had introduced me to Dr. Rebecca Stone, a research scientist from the nearby university, who was recruiting exceptionally talented high school students for her artificial intelligence laboratory. My original robotics project, the one that Jake had stolen and claimed as his own achievement, had evolved into something far more sophisticated under Dr. Stone's mentorship. Your approach to neural network optimization is genuinely innovative, Dr. Stone told me during our second meeting. Most students your age are still learning basic programming concepts, but you're developing algorithms that could have commercial applications. The validation felt incredible after years of having my abilities dismissed and my achievements stolen. Here were genuine experts recognizing my potential and offering opportunities that no amount of deception could have secured. The contrast with Jake's fraudulent success couldn't have been more dramatic. But the most significant development came on a Thursday afternoon when Jake's defense attorney made an unexpected proposal. Mr. Davidson, an experienced criminal lawyer, whom my parents had hired despite their rapidly dwindling finances, called to request a meeting with me. The purpose of the meeting was shocking in its implications. Your brother's case is complicated by the fact that much of the evidence against him was gathered through sophisticated surveillance techniques, Mr. Davidson explained when we met at his downtown office. The question is whether that surveillance was legal and whether the person who installed it had legitimate reasons for monitoring Jake's activities. The lawyer was essentially suggesting that I could help reduce Jake's criminal charges by testifying that my surveillance equipment had been installed for legitimate purposes, rather than as a deliberate attempt to entrap my brother. If I claimed that the cameras were merely intended to protect my own robotics project, then the footage of Jake's thefts might be considered admissible evidence rather than the product of illegal spying. The irony is that your testimony could actually help Jake avoid the most serious charges, Mr. Davidson continued. If you acknowledge that he stole your science project, the prosecution might be willing to treat his other crimes as a pattern of bad judgment, rather than organized criminal enterprise. The proposal was astounding in its moral complexity. Jake had stolen my work, destroyed my reputation, and caused months of family conflict, but now, his salvation might depend on my willingness to publicly acknowledge his theft. The brother who had never admitted wrongdoing would need his victim's testimony to escape the full consequences of his crimes. I asked for time to consider the request, though my decision was already forming in my mind. This was bigger than family loyalty or personal revenge. Jake was 18 years old, legally an adult, but still young enough to change course if he faced appropriate consequences. Prison would destroy his future, but community service and restitution might actually teach him the value of honest work. That evening, I called my parents for the first time since leaving Lincoln High. The conversation was awkward and painful, filled with long silences and carefully chosen words that couldn't quite bridge the gap between us. We know we made mistakes, Mom said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. We should have listened to you about Jake's behavior. We should have recognized what was happening before it reached this point. Jake wants to talk with you, Dad added. He's finally ready to apologize, to admit what he did, and ask for your forgiveness. Would you consider coming home for dinner this weekend? The invitation felt surreal after months of being treated as the problematic child whose jealousy threatened family harmony. Now they needed my help, my testimony, my willingness to save the brother who had tried to destroy my future. The power dynamic had completely reversed, and I found myself holding Jake's fate in my hands. I'll come, I agreed. But I want Jake to understand that this conversation is about accountability, not just apology. If he's serious about changing, he needs to accept responsibility for everything he's done. Saturday evening arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood that pervaded our family home when I knocked on the front door. Mom answered immediately, as if she had been watching for my car. Her appearance shocked me. She had lost weight, her hair was streaked with new gray, and her eyes carried the haunted look of someone who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about her own parenting. Jake was waiting in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The confident, smiling boy who had stolen my achievements had been replaced by someone who looked far older than his 18 years. His college recruitment letters lay scattered across the coffee table, each one a reminder of opportunities that had been permanently lost. I'm sorry, he said immediately, the words tumbling out before I'd even sat down. I'm sorry I stole your project. Sorry I lied about it. Sorry I destroyed our relationship and hurt the family. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it. The apology was more complete than anything I had expected, but it was also clearly motivated by desperation rather than genuine remorse. Jake was facing criminal prosecution, social humiliation, and the complete collapse of his carefully constructed identity. His tears were real, but they were tears of self-pity rather than empathy for the people he had hurt. "Why did you do it?" I asked, genuinely curious about the thought process that had led my brother to choose theft over effort. "You're intelligent enough to have succeeded honestly. Why did you always choose shortcuts?" Jake was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling to articulate thoughts that he had probably never examined closely. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because it was easier. Because you made everything look so effortless that I thought I could fake it until I figured out how to actually do it. Because Mom and Dad expected me to be as smart as you, and I didn't know how to tell them that I wasn't." The confession revealed layers of family dysfunction that went beyond simple favoritism. Jake hadn't been the golden child by choice. He had been trapped in that role by parents who needed to believe that both their sons were exceptional. When he couldn't meet those expectations honestly, he had chosen deception rather than disappointing them. "The surveillance footage could help your case," I said finally. "If I testify that you stole my robotics project, the prosecutor might be willing to treat your other crimes as part of the same pattern rather than separate offenses. Prison time becomes community service felony charges, become misdemeanors." Jake's expression shifted from despair to hope, though he tried to hide his relief behind continued contrition. "But there are conditions," I continued. "You make full restitution to everyone you stole from, not just the schools, but also the individuals who bought stolen goods, thinking they were legitimate. You complete whatever community service is required without complaint. And you publicly acknowledge what you did, not just to our family, but to everyone who praised your fake achievements." The room fell silent as Jake contemplated the price of redemption. Public confession would destroy what remained of his reputation, but it would also clear the path for genuine rehabilitation. He could choose between defending lies that would eventually be exposed anyway, or accepting responsibility and earning the chance to rebuild his character on honest foundations. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Then I'll testify on Monday," I promised. "But Jake, this is your last chance. If you ever lie, cheat, or steal again, I won't be there to help you avoid the consequences." Sunday passed quietly with family conversations that resembled actual communication for the first time in years. Mom cooked Jake's favorite meal, but she also asked about my new school and expressed genuine interest in my robotics research. Dad discussed Jake's legal situation honestly, acknowledging the mistakes that had enabled his younger son's criminal behavior. As I prepared to return to Westfield Academy that evening, Jake approached me with one final request. "Could you teach me how to actually build something not for college applications or recognition just because I want to learn how to create, instead of taking what other people have made?" The question suggested that maybe finally Jake was ready to discover the satisfaction that comes from genuine achievement. It had taken criminal charges and public humiliation to reach this point. But perhaps my brother was finally prepared to choose the harder path of honest effort over the temporary convenience of deception. Monday morning brought unexpected news that transformed Jake's legal situation in ways none of us had anticipated. Stanford University, impressed by my genuine robotics research and Dr. Stone's recommendation, had offered me early admission with a full academic scholarship. The achievement was entirely my own, earned through ability rather than fraud, and it provided a stark contrast to Jake's fabricated accomplishments. More importantly, the public attention surrounding my Stanford acceptance created interest in the story behind my transfer from Lincoln High. When reporters learned about the stolen science project and family conflict that had led to my departure, they began asking questions about academic fraud that extended far beyond Jake's individual case. The investigation that followed revealed systematic problems within Lincoln High's advanced programs and ultimately led to policy changes that would protect future students from the kind of fraud that had nearly destroyed my educational opportunities. Jake's crimes had inadvertently exposed a culture of academic dishonesty that had been festering beneath the surface of suburban respectability. Sometimes justice arrives through unexpected channels, and sometimes the truth serves purposes beyond personal vindication. Jake's reckoning would teach him about responsibility and consequences, while my success would demonstrate that genuine achievement, though more difficult to attain, creates lasting value that can never be stolen or duplicated through deception. The courtroom on a chilly April morning was smaller than I had expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed the weak sunlight filtering through tall windows. Judge Patricia Chen, a stern woman in her 60s with graying hair and penetrating eyes, presided over Jake's sentencing hearing with the authority of someone who had seen countless young people make choices that would define their futures. Jake sat at the defendant's table wearing a navy blue suit that made him appear younger than his 18 years, his hands folded carefully in his lap. The confident boy who had once basked in unearned praise had been replaced by someone who finally understood the weight of consequences. His attorney, Mir Davidson, had prepared him well for this moment, but the outcome remained uncertain. I testified for 20 minutes describing Jake's theft of my robotics project and explaining the surveillance equipment that had captured evidence of his broader criminal activities. The prosecutor used my testimony to establish a pattern of dishonest behavior, while the defense attorney emphasized Jake's youth and potential for rehabilitation. The defendant has expressed genuine remorse, Mr. Davidson told the court. He has made full confession to all charges, agreed to complete restitution, and requested an opportunity to rebuild his character through community service rather than incarceration. Judge Chen listened impassively, occasionally asking questions that probed beneath the surface of legal arguments to examine the human elements of Jake's case. She was particularly interested in the family dynamics that had enabled his criminal behavior, and she spent several minutes discussing parental responsibility with both the prosecution and defense. When she finally announced her decision, Jake's relief was visible throughout his entire body. The court sentences the defendant to 2 years of supervised probation, 800 hours of community service to be completed with organizations that serve at-risk youth, and full restitution to all victims. The defendant will also submit to regular drug testing, maintain steady employment or enrollment in educational programs, and complete counseling sessions focused on ethical decision-making. Jake nodded eagerly at each condition, clearly understanding that he was receiving a second chance that many defendants in similar circumstances never received. The judge's decision reflected her belief that young people could change course if they faced appropriate consequences while retaining hope for their futures. But Judge Chen wasn't finished. She turned her attention to our family, addressing my parents with words that cut through months of denial and rationalization. The evidence suggests that this defendant's criminal behavior was enabled by a family system that prioritized achievement over character. I strongly recommend family counseling to address the dynamics that contributed to this situation, and I encourage all family members to examine their role in creating an environment where dishonesty seemed acceptable. The drive home from the courthouse was silent, except for Mom's quiet crying in the passenger seat. Dad gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension as he processed the judge's pointed criticism of their parenting decisions. Jake stared out the window, probably contemplating 800 hours of community service and the long road toward rebuilding his reputation. I followed behind them in my own car, heading back to Westfield Academy for afternoon classes that seemed almost surreal after the morning's legal proceedings. The contrast between my new academic environment and my family's criminal court experience highlighted how dramatically our paths had diverged in just a few months. Over the following weeks, Jake began his community service at Lincoln Community Center, working with middle school students who were struggling academically and socially. The supervisor, Mrs. Angela Martinez, was a former teacher who specialized in helping young people overcome the kinds of challenges that often led to poor choices and criminal behavior. Jake is learning that helping others requires genuine effort rather than shortcuts. Mrs. Martinez told me when I visited the center to donate some of my old robotics equipment. He's discovering that the satisfaction from earning someone's respect is much deeper than the temporary pleasure of fooling them. Jake's work involved tutoring students in mathematics and science subjects where his natural intelligence could finally be channeled toward constructive purposes. Without the pressure of maintaining a fraudulent reputation, he was free to acknowledge when he didn't understand concepts and to learn alongside the students he was supposed to be helping. Meanwhile, my parents were attending weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Michael Thompson, a family therapist who specialized in dysfunction related to academic pressure and sibling rivalry. Mom had initially resisted the idea of therapy, claiming that their family problems were situational rather than psychological. But she gradually came to understand the patterns that had enabled Jake's dishonesty. We created a competitive environment where success was more important than integrity, she admitted during one of our monthly family dinners. We praised Jake for achievements without asking how he had accomplished them, and we dismissed your concerns as jealousy rather than examining the evidence you were trying to show us. Dad had undergone an even more dramatic transformation. His business clients had initially questioned his judgment after Jake's criminal charges became public. But his honest acknowledgement of parenting mistakes and commitment to ethical standards had actually strengthened some of his professional relationships. I realized that I was applying different standards to my family than I used in my business, he explained. In finance, I verify every claim and documentation thoroughly, but at home, I accepted Jake's achievements without question because I wanted to believe they were real. The most significant change occurred in my relationship with Jake, which had evolved from bitter antagonism to cautious cooperation. He visited me at Westfield Academy one Saturday afternoon, touring the laboratories and workshops that were now my academic home. His reaction to the advanced equipment and sophisticated projects was a mixture of envy and genuine admiration. I could never have succeeded here, he said honestly, watching my classmates work on engineering projects that required months of sustained effort. I always looked for the easy way, but this kind of work requires real dedication. You could learn, I suggested. Community college has excellent programs that could prepare you for transfer to a 4-year university, but you'd have to earn your grades honestly this time. Jake was quiet for several minutes, clearly considering the possibility of rebuilding his academic future through legitimate effort. The boy who had once expected immediate success was finally learning that genuine achievement required patience, persistence, and humility. That evening, as we drove back toward Lincoln, Jake asked the question that had probably been troubling him for months. Do you think you could ever forgive me for what I did to you, Tim? The question deserved an honest answer, rather than polite reassurance. Jake had stolen months of my work, damaged my relationship with our parents, and forced me to transfer schools to escape the toxic environment that his lies had created. The consequences of his actions had been severe and lasting. I'm not angry anymore, I said finally. But forgiveness isn't just about letting go of resentment. It's about trusting that someone has genuinely changed. You'll have to prove through your actions that you've learned from this experience. How long will that take? Jake asked, clearly hoping for a specific timeline for redemption. However long it takes, I replied. Some bridges can be rebuilt, but the construction process requires steady work over many months, or even years. The foundation has to be solid this time. By the end of spring semester, Jake had completed 200 hours of community service and enrolled in summer classes at Lincoln Community College. His counselor reported significant progress in developing ethical decision-making skills, and his probation officer noted his consistent compliance with all court-ordered requirements. More importantly, Jake was beginning to experience the satisfaction that comes from earning achievements rather than stealing them. His tutoring students showed genuine improvement in their academic performance, and several parents had specifically requested that Jake continue working with their children. For the first time in my life, I'm proud of something I actually accomplished myself, he told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. It's harder than cheating, but it feels completely different. I understand now why you were always willing to work so hard for your projects. Meanwhile, my success at Westfield Academy had exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Dr. Stone's research laboratory had offered me a paid internship for the summer, and Stanford University had confirmed my early admission with additional scholarship opportunities based on my continued academic excellence. The contrast between our paths was stark, but not permanent. Jake was learning that rehabilitation required sustained effort and genuine commitment to change, while I was discovering that success built on authentic ability created opportunities that no amount of fraud could replicate. Our family dinners, which had resumed after months of awkward silence, now included conversations about ethics, responsibility, and the difference between achievement and accomplishment. Mom and Dad asked genuine questions about my research, rather than offering generic praise, while Jake shared stories from his community service that revealed his growing understanding of empathy and social responsibility. The healing process wasn't complete and probably never would be entirely finished. Trust, once broken, requires constant maintenance to remain strong. But for the first time in years, our family was building relationships based on honesty, rather than convenient myths about golden children and perfect achievements. Sometimes redemption arrives not through dramatic gestures, but through the quiet accumulation of better choices, made day after day, week after week, month after month. Jake's path toward genuine character would be measured not in grand proclamations, but in small moments of integrity, honesty, and service to others. 2 years later, I stand in my Stanford University dormitory room packing for summer break and reflecting on the journey that brought me here. The Advanced Artificial Intelligence project displayed on my desk bears little resemblance to the robotics system that Jake once stole, yet it represents the natural evolution of ideas that began in our family garage during those late nights of solitary work and discovery. The morning sunlight streaming through my window illuminates acceptance letters from graduate programs at MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Stanford itself, offering me opportunities to continue research that could revolutionize how machines learn and adapt. These opportunities exist because I chose to build my future on genuine ability rather than borrowed achievements, because I walked away from a toxic situation instead of continuing to fight battles on other people's chosen battlefields. My phone buzzes with a text message from Jake. Graduated from community college yesterday. Dean's list for 4 consecutive semesters. Transfer acceptance to State University confirmed for fall. Thank you for not giving up on me. The transformation he describes didn't happen overnight. Those 800 hours of community service became the foundation for genuine personal growth that extended far beyond his legal requirements. Jake discovered that helping struggling middle school students required patience, empathy, and authentic understanding, rather than clever shortcuts or manipulative charm. His academic performance at Lincoln Community College reflected his new commitment to earning, rather than stealing, achievements. Study groups replaced cheating networks, late nights in the library, replaced purchased assignments, and honest effort replaced fraudulent success. The grades he earned were lower than his stolen accomplishments had suggested, but they belonged to him completely. Our parents underwent their own painful journey toward awareness and accountability. Dad's business actually grew stronger after he publicly acknowledged his family's struggles and recommitted himself to ethical practices in both his professional and personal life. His clients appreciated his honesty about mistakes and his dedication to learning from failure, rather than hiding from consequences. Mom channeled her guilt and regret into volunteer work, with families dealing with academic pressure and sibling rivalry issues. Her experience with our family's crisis gave her credibility when counseling other parents about the dangers of favoritism, and the importance of character over achievement. I learned that loving your children means holding them accountable rather than protecting them from consequences. She told a parents' support group last month, "Enabling dishonesty isn't kindness, it's cruelty disguised as affection." The family dinners that had once featured uncomfortable silences and forced conversation now include genuine discussions about ethics goals and the satisfaction that comes from overcoming challenges through honest effort. Jake shares stories from his work with at-risk youth, describing how his own experience with consequences helps him connect with students who are considering dangerous shortcuts. Mrs. Rodriguez, my former guidance counselor at Lincoln High, sends me updates about policy changes that resulted from the investigation into academic fraud. The school district implemented new verification procedures for science fair projects, created anonymous reporting systems for academic misconduct, and established mentorship programs to help struggling students find legitimate support rather than resorting to cheating. Your situation sparked conversations that needed to happen, she wrote in her latest email. Other students are benefiting from the courage you showed in walking away from an unfair fight and finding your own path to success. Dr. Stone's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory has become my second home, where I work alongside graduate students and postdoctoral researchers on projects that could influence everything from medical diagnosis to environmental protection. The technical skills I developed during those lonely months in our garage have evolved into expertise that opens doors I never could have imagined. But the most profound lessons weren't technical ones. I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't fighting, but rather refusing to participate in corrupt systems. When my family chose lies over truth, favoritism over fairness, I chose to build my future elsewhere, rather than continuing to bang my head against walls that would never move. Jake learned that authentic achievement requires sustained effort and genuine understanding, but that the satisfaction from earning success honestly far exceeds the temporary pleasure of fooling others. His community service supervisor recently recommended him for a paid position working with troubled youth, recognizing his unique ability to connect with students who are contemplating the same destructive choices he once made. Jake understands consequences in ways that most counselors don't, Mrs. Martinez explained. He can speak to these kids about the real cost of dishonesty because he's paid that price himself. His authenticity cuts through their defenses in ways that textbook knowledge never could. Our parents discovered that genuine love sometimes requires uncomfortable honesty, rather than convenient denial. The golden child they had celebrated was largely a fiction, but the flawed human being underneath that facade proved capable of growth, redemption, and authentic contribution to his community. The legal system that could have destroyed Jake's future instead provided structure for his rehabilitation. Judge Chen's emphasis on community service rather than punishment created opportunities for him to develop empathy and social responsibility that no classroom lecture could have taught. Mrs. Martinez recently told me that Jake has applied to transfer into a social work program, hoping to build a career helping young people avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed his own future. His application essays honestly describe his criminal charges and subsequent rehabilitation, presenting his experience as qualification rather than liability. Students need mentors who understand their temptations, Jake wrote in his personal statement. I can help them because I know exactly how it feels to choose shortcuts and face consequences. I can show them that accountability leads to freedom, while deception always leads to prison, whether that prison has bars or not. Stanford University's robotics laboratory has offered me a position in their doctoral program, where I'll continue developing artificial intelligence systems that can adapt and learn in ways that mirror human cognitive processes. The work builds directly on the foundation I created during those solitary nights in our garage, when I believed that genuine innovation was possible if someone was willing to work hard enough and long enough. But I also received another offer that represents a different kind of opportunity. Lincoln Community Center, where Jake completed his community service, has asked me to develop STEAM programs for middle school students who show potential in science and technology but lack resources or support at home. The position would combine my technical expertise with mentorship opportunities that could change young lives. The choice between prestigious graduate study and community service reflects the broader lesson that this entire experience has taught me. Success isn't just about personal achievement. It's about using your abilities to create positive change in the world around you. Sometimes the most important projects aren't the ones that advance your own career, but the ones that lift up other people who are struggling to find their path. Jake and I have rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, like engineers constructing a bridge that must bear weight for decades. Trust, once broken, requires constant maintenance and honest communication to remain strong. We meet monthly for coffee and conversation that ranges from family updates to philosophical discussions about ethics and responsibility. "I still don't understand how you found the strength to walk away instead of fighting," he told me recently. "Everything in me wanted to argue and prove my point, but you just left and built something better somewhere else." "Fighting would have been easier," I admitted. But it also would have trapped me in their system, playing by their rules, accepting their definition of victory. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to engage with injustice and instead create your own path forward. The community college graduation ceremony where Jake received his associate degree was small and understated, nothing like the elaborate celebrations that had once marked his fraudulent achievements. But watching him walk across that stage to receive a diploma he had genuinely earned was one of the most meaningful moments our family had shared in years. Mom cried during his speech to fellow graduates, where Jake briefly acknowledged his past mistakes and thanked the teachers, counselors, and community service supervisors who had helped him discover the satisfaction of honest achievement. Dad captured photos that would eventually replace the newspaper clippings, celebrating Jake's stolen science fair victory. That evening, as our family gathered for dinner at Jake's favorite restaurant, I realized that we had finally become the people we always had the potential to be. Not perfect, not without scars from our past conflicts, but genuine in ways we had never managed during the years of lies and favoritism and stolen achievements. The most important lesson isn't that crime doesn't pay, or that honesty is always rewarded, though both of those statements happen to be true. The deeper truth is that authentic relationships require authentic people, and authentic people can only emerge when they're willing to face consequences for their choices. I learned that my worth wasn't determined by my family's recognition or society's applause, but by my own commitment to using my abilities constructively and ethically. Jake learned that shortcuts lead to dead ends, while genuine effort creates paths that extend far beyond any single achievement. Our parents learned that love sometimes requires holding people accountable rather than protecting them from consequences, and that the most important gift they could give their children was the opportunity to develop real character rather than impressive facades. The artificial intelligence system I'm developing at Stanford could eventually influence millions of lives, but the most important program I've ever worked on is the one that helped rebuild my family's capacity for honesty, growth, and mutual respect. That project required debugging years of corrupted code, installing new ethical protocols, and learning to value sustainable performance over flashy demonstrations. Real family isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest enough to grow together. Real achievement isn't about impressing others, it's about developing your abilities to serve purposes larger than yourself. Real success isn't measured by trophies or recognition, but by the knowledge that you've earned whatever you've accomplished through your own authentic effort. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is bet on yourself instead of begging others for fairness. Sometimes walking away from toxic situations is healthier than fighting battles you can never win. And sometimes the bridge you rebuild after it's been burned proves stronger than the original structure ever was. As I prepare for my summer internship at Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, I carry with me not just technical knowledge and research experience, but wisdom earned through navigating family crisis and personal growth. The robots I'm building can learn and adapt to new challenges. But the most important learning has happened in the space between my ears and the region around my heart. Jake's text messages now include updates about his volunteer work, his academic progress, and his growing understanding of how to help other young people avoid the mistakes that nearly cost him his future. Our conversations have evolved from suspicious interrogations to genuine exchanges of ideas and experiences. The boy who once stole my project is now building his own future through honest effort and authentic service. The parents who once enabled dishonesty are now modeling accountability and growth. The family that nearly shattered under the weight of lies and favoritism has been rebuilt on foundations of truth and mutual respect. And the young man who once believed he had to fight every battle and prove every point has learned that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is create your own path forward. Build your own definition of success and trust that authentic achievement will create opportunities that no amount of fraud could ever replicate. If you've ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or trapped in situations where others refuse to recognize your worth, remember that your value isn't determined by their recognition. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is refusing to participate in corrupt systems and instead building something better elsewhere. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your future? Or have you watched someone close to you struggle with the temptation to take shortcuts instead of earning their success honestly? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with your own experiences, please give it a like to help others find these lessons about integrity, family, and the power of authentic achievement. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity through honest effort, rather than clever manipulation. And share this with anyone who might need encouragement to trust in their own abilities, rather than depending on others' approval or recognition. Thank you for joining me on this journey through family crisis and personal growth. May your own path forward be built on the solid foundation of authentic effort, genuine relationships, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've earned whatever success you achieve. The robots we build and the bridges we rebuild are only as strong as the integrity of the people who design them.